Right, welcome everyone to our webinar today. We're going to be discussing the reporting and reimbursement requirements for the value-added producer grant. So this is specifically for if you have already received this grant, not if you're currently in the application process, although if you are, it's still good to know about. But this is so you can request the funds from the grant that you've received, and then also do the reporting that's required in that period. So I am Jessica Shaw. I'm not Kyle Player, like it says on my screen, but I am with Matson Consulting, which is a private consulting firm located in Aiken, South Carolina. And we work with a bunch of folks on these applications throughout the year. And so we also like to provide a little insight into what to expect afterwards and how to go through that process. I'm also joined today by Jim Matson from Matson Consulting, Brian Wheat from the South Carolina State Small Business Development Center. And he is also with Common Joy, which is a loofah farm that has also received a value-added grant in the past. So he'll be able to help provide some kind of firsthand insight and experience into doing those reports. And then we also have V. Gartman here from USDA Rural Development. Everyone should hopefully be familiar with her by now because she's the one who sent out your grant agreement and all the paperwork and everything. And so you'll be working with her directly on this process. So if you have questions or anything, she's also here to help answer those. And we have some other folks here too that you may also recognize just in the list there who you may have worked with. So if you have any questions at the end, let us know. We've got Jim Johnson here from University of South Carolina, SBDC. So some of y'all may have worked with him on your applications. And so he can help answer questions too for y'all. All right, so let's get started. Here's just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to go back through some expenses that are allowable or unallowable, just kind of remind you of what you can do from your budget, talk about some strategies for doing your reimbursement, and then actually go through the process of what paperwork you're required to do for your reimbursement, how to track your budget, those sorts of things. And we'll go through the reporting that's required for that as well. Budget modifications, and then we'll also have some time for questions, but we'll kind of open it up for questions along the way too. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Jim, and he's going to kick it off for us.
Well, good afternoon, y'all. Just starting the first thing, I guess, talking for anything for what you're going to do for your plan and dealing with your paperwork for USDA is figuring out what your work plan is. And for this year, it is attached to your agreement, but it's also there in the middle of the application that went in. But the numbers that went in there are really where you're going to come back to what you can be paid on. So trying to follow everything's going to come back and follow and track back what you had in the plan. And, everything kind of fits under these, the categories on the left-hand side the USDA cares about, which is personnel, people, travel, office supplies, office equipment, which you shouldn't have anything under for this grant, supplies, contractual, which is paying for third parties or other people are doing, and others that could be there. And like I said, this should be there. It should be explained in your budget notes along with the grants you did when you sent the grant in. Now, if you're like me, that was, 6 months ago, and I can't remember what I did yesterday. So I would encourage you though to pull this out with your grant agreement and just have that there, because it's going to be the basis and really the basis of what you're going to be able to be paid back on. And it, it's kind of, we talk about it when you're doing for the application, but when you're funding your grant, those numbers matter. So that's what you're trying to add things back to make sure where you're working. Folks are going to go into more detail about, how to fill that out and how to track it later. But I just wanted to hit that because really that's kind of the one key piece and the thing that you need to save. And I would say get a paper copy as well as getting one on your computer as well. So you have that in, so when your computer dies, you're still able to follow this and know what's going on with the grant. But I was going to start with the things that you couldn't do. So, these shouldn't be in your budget, but just in case, and they're things that always come up. So we wanted to hit them pretty quickly and go on as the federal, it's not V that's doing this. These are federal grant rules that stop it. You can't pay for trucks. You can't get tractors. And under this grant, you can't do any, repairs, major maintenance for the vehicles. Now you can, possibly pay for if you have transportation, you can pay for gas. It's going back and forth to location, but you can't do the repairs and maintenance of the vehicle while doing that. So, and then there's other things that you can't do is this grant is only for post-production activities. So, if you're growing a plant, it's from the time it's in the storage thing. It's not when it's coming into the barn, but it's after it's been in the barn for storage. If it's for an animal, you can think of it basically from the time that you're putting a knife in it. You can't use for raiding or any of that. So nothing on the farm side. You can't buy hives for bees or any of that stuff as well. It has to be, only for that side of it. Along that same time, you can't do any equipment, which is, if you don't have it there, which is, there's some things on the federal rules. If you have that in your grant for supplies, which are things that are less than $5,000 for particular items, which by federal rule, that doesn't count as equipment. But you can't buy any equipment or anything because that's, I know a lot of folks, that's what you'd like to do with the grant, but that's, just a limitation in the rules. And again, back to the whole, you can't do anything on the farm side. So no seeds, no planting, no harvest labor, no supplies, no animal feed. So like I said, if you think about it, it's from the time that it goes into storage, basically. If it's a crop, you can pay for it, and forward for those marketing and value-added activities. That's the name, value-added producer grant, for the value-added activity. And then a few other things that you really can't cover under this thing are, you can't pay for yourself or any direct family member under the grant. Those are not allowable. So if they were there, or you're thinking about it, you can't do it, and you can't change those, And also you can't pay yourself back. So yourself or your family, it doesn't matter how many business names you have or how many LLCs it goes through. You're not supposed to do that. And then because it's supposed to be for the product activities and not for other things, you can't buy like promotional T-shirts or, wine stems that you're etching at a winery or things like that, or anything like that, or promotional product. Even if you're trying to build your brand, those are not acceptable activities on there. So no promotional products or things that you're doing in it, within there. And then of course, go back to that work plan. That work plan and what you said you were spending your money on is the base of what you're trying to do within the grant. So it's just set back in there to go back to that work plan and look at the things you've done. So you can't suddenly decide that you were doing, spending this on, let's say grain, and suddenly you want to spend it on pork. It has to be on the same area that you're trying to do what you applied for. Those are the things that the reviewers read and reviewed you on. That's what you were scored on based on what those activities were in the grant. So they're kind of been judged. You can't change away from those because that is, changing from what you said you were going to do under the grant. So, this is one of those cases that you said it, now you got to do it. There will be a chance at the end to talk about there is a chance. We know the future is a little uncertain. So there is a chance to do basically one change in the grant over time. And Jessica's going to talk about that later. But the other thing when it comes to matching funds, and this is one area that I think a lot of people get hung up on is, if you can't pay for it to be paid for with the grant, you can't use it as matching funds. So the same thing, you can't match on your grant by, buying a truck, or you can't pay, those same expenses for, maintenance and all that for your vehicle and use it to match. So you have to match with activities, the same thing that you could spend money on. And what I often tell people is a good way to think about it is think about the fact that you spend $1 and you get 50 cents back from the federal government on these things. That's the easiest way I've always found to think about it. But I always say, look at it, look at the details and activity, but always go back to your work plan and budget as to what's going to be covered and, what activities will work under that. And, as far as making sure the reimbursements will happen, smoothly and easily, because everybody wants to get the money. It makes it a lot easier on V if things are turned in right as well, because that makes her life easier. She's managing. You have to think about these are 3-year grants for most people. So she's not only managing the grants from this year, but also the ones from 2 years prior. So, that's a lot of grants as well as the other 12 programs she's running. So it's a lot of things happening, a lot of activities happening, and the easier you can make her job, the quicker you're going to get your funding and your easier it's going to go, because if you get into something where you have to go back and forth with a lot of questions, not only does that make it hard, but it's going to make it a lot harder to get your money when you want it. So, try to do that. And Jessica's going to go into some of the details now about, on the positive side of things, where things work within there, on the grant side.
Yeah, so just a reminder here of some of the allowable expenses. Again, these should already be in your work plan and budget, but just in case you need a reminder, marketing, processing, supplies related to those items. You can include, especially in the wake of COVID and all of that, mask, gloves, cleaner, sanitizer, all of that. You can include those items. Make sure that your labor is not family or production related labor. And again, if it's just related to your processing, marketing, and selling. And like Jim said, just look back at your budget, use that. So now just a couple of strategies that I want to discuss for reimbursement. Number one thing we always say is to start soon and to start small. So go ahead and try to get your first reimbursement in at the end of this month, really, because you can do it after a month, even if it's for a little bit. So even if it's, $500 or something like that, go ahead through that process. It'll help you get familiar with the paperwork. It'll help you get familiar with the timeline of how long it takes for you to get that funding back from the USDA, because you don't want to wait and have a huge expense that you're, waiting cash flow wise to try to get that back. So plan for that turnaround time, and then come up with a pattern of when you might want to submit. You can do it every month. You can't do it sooner than monthly. So you can't do it every 2 weeks, but you can do it monthly. You can do it every 2 months, 3 months, whatever works for you. Again, I would not suggest waiting a long time before you start doing your reimbursements, especially if you're thinking about applying again in the future, because you'll have to have your grant closed out if you want to go back for another one, for a different product or whatever. And so you don't want to be scrambling to try to spend that money down if you want to go back. So just kind of plan that out. Think about when you want to do your submissions. And like Jim said, your plans and your business will change. So have a backup plan. If you listed a contractor that you would work with to do your marketing and they're now no longer available, usually there's some flexibility with that. So have that as a backup plan. And then just communicate with V if there are major changes in your business, things that would change your budget, talk to her about it. But again, really stick to what's in your budget there. Also remember to renew your SAM. That does expire every year and it has to be up to date for you to keep getting those reimbursement back. Also, when you're renewing your SAM, make sure you do it through sam.gov, not sam.com, not sam.anything. Make sure it's sam.gov. You'll also probably get some emails from third-party sites out there that are saying, hey, your SAM's expiring, because they have access to that information too if it's public. Don't use those. Don't use anybody that's going to charge you money. Don't ever pay to renew your SAM. Make sure you're going directly to sam.gov to check that expiration date and to check that renewal.
And I always suggest don't wait the very last second, because sometimes things happen, so you don't want it to lapse. So go ahead and do it, a little bit before, to make sure that everything's correct and you can go through that template. Usually it's not very complicated for renewal, but just to be on the safe side.
Jessica, I was also gonna say a similar thing and add to it that if there's somebody who had a SAM number and everything was registered and before they applied for this grant cycle, if they're going to renew it and they haven't gotten their UEI and gone through all that type of stuff, they're definitely going to want to give themselves a little bit of time to go through that. And you can call either Jim or I or anybody to walk through that process. But most definitely don't wait on that, because they've transitioned to a new system. And if you already had a SAM number, or already were registered with sam.gov prior to this grant, you're going to need to go through their new system, and it can be time intensive for people. So again, reiterating that, don't wait.
That's a good point. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start getting into the actual reimbursement process and tracking your budget. Couple items here. Make sure that you're using the templates and the paperwork that's been provided. V will have provided all of the forms and everything that you're going to need. Also, you should have your grant agreement, which will have instructions on how to do some of that reporting and those items in there. It should also have a copy of your work plan and budget. So just use all of that paperwork. Keep in mind your total expenses are usually tracked by budget category, not necessarily by task. So in your application, you may have laid out 3 or so tasks. They could be something like increase our processing, hire new labor, conduct a marketing campaign, those sorts of things. But within there, you will have budget categories, and those are the items that Jim pointed out earlier, which was personnel, supplies, other, all of those. Those are the categories that you're going to be tracking with your budget. And we'll show that a little bit later. We'll actually have 2 examples, one with it tracking by just the budget category and another one with it tracking by tasks, if that's how you prefer to do it. So you can see both ways. Also make sure you're keeping track of your receipts, your invoices, checks, anything that you're spending money on that you want to make sure you're reimbursed for under this. Keep a copy of it, take a picture of it with your phone, scan it into your computer, whatever it is, because you will need that as proof for your reimbursement. And then just be clear as possible when relating those receipts back to your reimbursement. Again, I'll talk to you about how to do that, but it basically as clear as you can make it, it makes it easier for V, as Jim mentioned earlier, and hopefully faster for you to be able to get your reimbursement back. So just a quick overview of the items that are required for that reimbursement. You have your SF-270, which is an actual fillable form that V has provided to you, which is where you will lay out what your reimbursement request is for that specific period that you're requesting it for. Then you'll have a reimbursement request letter. This is a document that you will create, usually just a Word document. We call it a letter, it's in letter format, but it's really just a narrative that describes what it is that you're requesting and relates it back to your project and to your budget. Then you have your attachments. Those are all those receipts and items that I told you to take a picture of or scan in. You'll attach them with that narrative. Then you also have a bank book, and this is more for long-term internal tracking for both you and V. So this will help you see how you are spending down each of those budget categories over the grant period. It will also help on the back end if you end up wanting to do a budget modification. You'll be able to see where you've spent all your funds at, or, so if you need to move it from one category or something like that. So I will go ahead and pull up some simplified examples of those. Again, the examples that I'm going to show now are, they're like I said, they're simplified. So rounded numbers, very clear statements, all of that. Yours probably won't look like that because it's not often that you're going to be spending exactly $1,000 on supplies. But then we'll have a real life example from Brian after that. So he'll show you what his actual reports look like so you can kind of see them in action. So let me switch over to that. So the first document that I'm going to share is actually going to be the, which one is, I'll do the narrative first so you can kind of see how we lay it out. And then I'll relate that back to the 270 for you so you can see how all those numbers get in there. Let's zoom in, make sure everybody can read that. So this is the sample reimbursement letter. Again, it's laid out in this letter format, but it's really just, as you see, lays out your different your budget categories and the expenses in there. So you see, we start with a statement that talks about the total amount that we're requesting for the reimbursement. This makes it very clear how much you are expecting that you will get back from the grant as a reimbursement. We also state what period this covers. So this is going to be for October. So then our first budget category that we're looking at is going to be personnel. So during this time, I state that we've spent $1,000 on personnel during this time period. And I state who the personnel was and what they were doing. So they were related to processing and sales. We have our general processing labor and our packing shed labor. These people should directly be in your budget. They should be people who you've listed in there. They should be doing the things that you said that people in your budget would be doing. So if, for example, you have general processing labor in there, but you maybe called them something else, as long as they're fulfilling those roles, you have them in there. And then I say that there's attached a copy of our payroll expenses that are labeled with payroll A. You can label it however you need to, but again, you should have now something attached that says payroll A on it, and it should be listing these people on there. So then I say we're requesting a reimbursement of $1,000. And in this example that I'm providing to you, because you will get a copy of this after the webinar, it includes an in-kind example, which is right here in personnel. So you're requesting $1,000, but you're also providing an in-kind match of $1,000, and that's going to be coming from the owner time. So the owners provided 50 hours of their time that was valued at $20 an hour. The value of that time should have been something that you stated in your application originally if you included in-kind time. If you did not include in-kind in your application originally, you cannot go back and change it. You have to stick with whatever kind of match you originally said. So just use that, whatever you stated in your application originally, just use that same justification here for how much time they provided and the value of that. And then describe what they did. So, you know, they helped pack produce, they managed the orders, they transported it, etc. So now, again, your match and your federal funds should be the same. So you're requesting $1,000 and you have provided $1,000 worth of in-kind. Similarly to supplies, this example includes match from inventory, which is another type of in-kind match. So again, we have incurred costs of $1,000 from supplies. You're going to list out what those supplies were for, boxes, labels, etc. I put here wholesale packing company in that amount because then you should hopefully have a receipt from wholesale packing company with that amount on it. So you will attach that receipt from them. Same thing with Vistaprint. So you're again requesting a reimbursement for $1,000, but this time you provided your in-kind match of $1,000 from your produce inventory. So you state how much of that you have provided. So we've provided 500 pounds. The commodity value of that, again, this value should have been stated in your original application when you requested that type of match. And then the total of the in-kind match. Again, it's 1 for 1. So you are asking for a reimbursement of 1,000. You're providing 1,000 worth of your produce inventory. The last one I have on here is for contractual. And this is just a straight cash match, which is probably most relevant for you all, but it has all the examples in there in case you need it. So we had contractual costs of $1,200. This is related to working with website development company, to posting ads on Facebook, whatever it might be. Again, you'll attach those receipts, those invoices, whatever they are, to this letter from those specific people. And then you see here, we are requesting a reimbursement of $600 because the other $600 is provided as your cash match. So you're only going to get back half of what you spent there because the rest is your match. And then there's just a statement that everything's attached to it. And then you want to make sure you actually attach everything. Any questions so far about that letter or comments from anybody?
I have a quick question, Jessica. That in the contractual, it totaled up to be 1,200 in expenses. Could you re-explain that for us? So you're only asking for 600 of that 1,200?
Right, because your other 600 is your cash match. So you spent 1,200. Yeah, you spent 1,200. You get 600 back. 600 is cash match. It's different in your in-kind matches because you spent 1,000 of supplies, but you're also providing 1,000 worth of inventory. So your expense wise, you've only spent 1,000, but you, in terms of what you're reporting to the USDA is also the value of your match. So that gets combined. So technically it's $2,000 is the total value of your supplies. 1,000 is what you spent, 1,000 from your produce. So you still only get half of that back from the USDA, which is 1,000. Is that?
Thanks. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I know it can be that both of those things can be confusing sometimes. So.
Yeah, and I'm hoping too with some of the examples because Brian does have some workbooks that he'll show you of how he tracks time and all of that. So like the in-kind time. So I'm hoping that some of those examples will help clarify that as well.
And I would say, although this is a narrative, you don't have to go into great detail. If you notice, you don't have to say, I'm getting this type of box, I'm doing this. You just have to know enough so you can identify what it is. So if you see on the expenses, Jessica's just listing the company. So you can figure out what the invoice, what the receipt is.
Yeah, and again, relate it back to that budget as much as you can, your work plan and budget. So if you name some specifics in there, then I would definitely name them here. All right, let me pull up the 270. That's the 270. There we go. So this is the form that is provided from V that you will fill out to go along with that narrative. The beginning of it here is just filling out your information and the information for the request. So USDA Rural Development is the agency. This is a reimbursement request. For your first request, it will be number 1. Obviously, it will go up as you submit additional requests. And then the period covered. So here we're stating that this is for October, but again, if you're doing it for 2 months, it'll be for whatever period it is that you're requesting those expenses over. Then you just fill this out with your information. There's a separate section for payee information, but that's only if it would be different for whatever reason from your organizational information. But in general, it should be the same as your organization information. Then this is where you're going to lay out those numbers that we just went over in our letter. So the as of date right now is the end of October, because that is the period, again, that we're requesting it through. So personnel. So we discussed how we had $1,000 of expenses and payroll, and then we had $1,000 of in-kind. So combined, we had $2,000 that are outlaid here. So that's what this is listing here. We aren't listing program income on this, so you don't have to worry about that. So then that will automatically total for you down these lines. And then if you didn't have an advancement, you also shouldn't have anything in there. So it just continues to total down for you. Most importantly, though, you want to fill out the non-federal and the federal share of the amount. So that's the line F and G. Those should be the same. They should equal, because again, this is a 1-for-1 match. And so whatever you're requesting, you should also be providing in your non-federal share. So your non-federal share, if you'll remember from our letter, was our in-kind match, which came from the owner time. So that was $1,000. Then the federal share is what you've requested to be reimbursed for, which is also $1,000. And then you also didn't have any previous payment requests. So that just continues to total down the line. Same thing for supplies. It's divided out the same way. And then same thing for contractual. You see our contractual cost was $1,200, $600 from the non-federal and $600 from federal. These lines automatically total across for you, so you don't have to worry about adding them up, which is nice. If you do have a request that includes more than 3 budget categories, so you remember on that original budget, there were multiple categories in there, such as other, travel, I can't remember what else might be in there, but if you have more than 3 on your request, you have to do a separate form. So just keep that in mind, because there's only spots for 3 there. And most importantly, don't forget to sign it, because if it's not signed, it's not complete. So you want to sign it, and then you'll submit that along with your letter and your attachments to your letter, which are your receipts. All right, I think Marvin has a question.
Yes. You were saying something about advancements. What was that? Can you explain that?
As far as I'm aware, and V can correct me on this, they are not allowing advancements under this program. So these forms that they provide are standard forms across multiple different programs. And so that's just why they have that spot on there for advancements. But everything that you're doing now should just be for reimbursement.
Thank you.
So, okay, V's nodding, so I'm thinking, confirming that's right. Okay. All right, and then I'll just show the bank book really quick, and then we'll shoot it over to Brian after that. Alrighty, here's the bank book. This is an Excel form that V will provide to you. And this just lays out, again, all of your budget categories and the totals that you have in there. So for this, this is just for the federal share. This is only for the grant. This is not including your match amount. So for this example, the total grant was $180,000. And then you see how that's broken out across all of our categories that we had listed in there. So for each request that you submit and is approved, you're going to put it in your bank book. And that is to help you keep track of all of the requests that you do and how much you're spending down in each category. So you see how we have request number 1, which is from that example that I just showed you. The total was $2,600, $1,000 for personnel, $1,000 from supplies, and $600 from contractual. The yellow lines automatically reduce down for you, so you don't have to, again, do any math. It'll automatically do it for you. And so it just populates with how much now you have left in each category. So you see request number 2, we're going to keep adding each request to those white lines there, and it will spend it down for you as you're doing your budgets there. This is really important, again, because at the end, you'll be able to see if, for example, you've spent all your travel funds, but you know you're going to need more, but you maybe haven't spent as much in contractual as you thought. You could potentially request a budget modification there. But you don't really want to do that until you kind of know you need to. And this is a really great tool for keeping track of that. Any
And
questions?
everything
Or
ties together. If you notice, the totals on the letter are the same as the totals in the SF 270, and they're the same ones that are going to go back into your budget, your bank book here. So if you notice for request ones, you're having that, like that $600 that Brian mentioned earlier that came from the 1,200. This is where that will come in as the expense. And you see that goes from the letter to the 270 all the way across. So all the categories will be the same on all three pieces of paper when you're done. That's the goal, at least.
yeah, if it doesn't match, then you need to go back and take a look at it. All right. Brian, if you want to share some of your actual examples too, we can take a look at those and y'all can see what it might actually look like without all the nice pretty numbers.
Absolutely. Happy to share here. I'll preface this with a couple of things. I did something here, discover. Okay. The first thing is that I will say that the very first reimbursement request that I did, it took me like half of a day to prepare, and it shouldn't take you all that long. I am somewhat of an overachiever when it comes to this stuff, I suppose. But I wanted to set something up that I could come back to regularly, and it would be easy for me to do and keep track of as I go through the next 3 years, right? So I was thinking smarter, not harder. Like, how can I set this up so that it doesn't take me half a day every time to like shuffle through my receipts and try to connect all these 4 documents to each other, because it can be complicated. And a whole month goes by and you're doing your thing and you're not thinking about this reimbursement request, and you go to sit down and do it again, and you kind of almost have to relearn everything over again, teach yourself again. So I do think that old adage of like an ounce of prevention kind of thing, by preparing everything up front, taking the time to do it, can be really valuable in the long run. And I recommend it. So let's take a look here at this work plan. I'm going to walk you through my workflow as though I were putting a request for reimbursement in, and kind of like my day on that very first day when I was preparing all these documents. And I'll try to make it as quick as possible, but it all starts with the work plan. So Jessica, could you make it so that I could share? There we go. So here we go. So I go back to my work plan, which is, everybody has one. It's in your grant narrative. And you will have described, what your tasks are, and some of the items underneath each of those tasks, the major heading that task will be comprised of. And then you go through to identify, what you're spending in each of your tasks in your budget, right? So I changed all my numbers. I removed my numbers, but I can still talk about it. So task 1, 2, 3, right? My first one is general supplies and operational expenses. And I call that, in all the rest of my documents, supplies and operational expenses. Task 2 is hiring employees to represent and sell products, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's labor. Task 3, that's implementing marketing strategies, blah, blah, blah. That's marketing and promotion. So these are going to be the highlighted ones here. Task 1 is going to be my supplies and operational expenses. 2 is going to be labor. 3 is going to be marketing and promotion. And as I go down through here, I see, well, my budget, I've outlined what I'm spending in task 1. So I know for supplies and operational expenses, I'm going to spend money on travel. So I wrote travel into my budget. I wrote supplies into my budget, and I wrote contractual, which is actually purchasing raw product for my value-added product from other farms. And so that's included in my supplies necessary to execute on the project. 2 is labor. So that's basically just me hiring people to do all my processing and marketing and sales. So that was a bulk of my budget. The contractual labor is the only subcategory under that task 2. And then task 3 is marketing and promotion. I put a few marketing supplies in there, stuff to do tabling events, so on and so forth. And I put some contractual marketing in there for, website maintenance. And I think that's kind of it. That's the only thing that was underneath there. And also I think maybe hosting fees. So this information, you all have the same information. This is where I generate those letters from and all the subsequent documents that we're talking about here for requesting reimbursement. So I'll go into my number 2. The next step that I would do if I were requesting reimbursement, I would go ahead and open up my spreadsheet that I created here. And that is right here. Can you all see this screen, this spreadsheet? Okay, excellent. So what I did up front is I created a spreadsheet that I could use every month, right? So I collect all my receipts in my glove box, in my pockets, in my laundry, and then finally I'll get them all together when it's time. I'll scan them and I'll keep the digital record of them in a folder that's titled October 2022. And then I'll take that information and I'll enter it into this. Well, in this case, it's July, right? So, and I'll put a date and again, this is overkill, but I'm telling you, to do this up front has been very helpful, and it's allowed me to pull data and also really helps me with my accounting records and everything. It ties it all in. So basically I just enter, the date that the purchase was made, the name of the company, what the item is, and then the purpose. This purpose here helps me fill out that letter later on, because I can say things that come from my grant narrative. So I can, no one's going to know what I mean by, well, people know what I mean by bleach, but like a pop-up banner or, usage fee, those things maybe aren't so relevant if they're not directly pulled from your work plan or someone can't sift through them easily. So I basically convert whatever this says to something that's understandable and comes from my grant narrative. Contractual labor, boom, we know what that is. That's under a task. That's easy. And then I have a drop-down menu here. I inserted this, and honestly, each individual will have something different here, but I can help any one of you. I'm pretty sure we've all worked, either Jim or myself or someone on the call has worked with each one of you. So I can help you all create one of these for yourself if you really want to. But created a drop-down menu. I just choose which task I know this falls under, and I put it under that task. And then I also created subtask category drop-downs where I can do the same thing. Oh, is this task? And these are not, this doesn't dictate what this says. These are independent of each other, but I know what goes with what. So I would say, all right, well, task 2, I know is my labor. So I put it there, contractual. All right, sweet. And then I put the amount. And then I created a scenario here that queries all of this stuff and totals up the numbers under each task and each subcategory. So task 2, if anything over here is a task 2 number under labor and contractual, it's all going to add up over here. If anything over there is a task 1 supplies or task 1 contractual or task 1 travel, it's all going to total up over here. You can see I only have one task 1 travel over here. So that gets added up and put in there. And now this is a number that helps me when it comes to writing that letter. I take this number and I'll go over to the letter. Let's see here. Let me get back to sharing. I'm going to stop sharing and just share my desktop. And I'm not so good at multitasking, Jessica. So if there are any questions that come in the chat, let me know. But let's see here. So my letter, I take those numbers that totaled up, and I know under my task 1, that's the total amount I'm requesting. So that just makes it easier for me to pull that number. I don't have to add anything anywhere. It's all already done for me whenever I enter my receipts in. And then I have each one of those items that I can pull out based on those subcategories. You all don't have to have subcategories. I do. It helps me stay organized. And I like to do things more complicated than most. My friends and family members say it's the wheat way. We like to overcomplicate things. So then another tab that I put together to help, we have to track mileage, right? Everybody probably should have some travel written into your budget. I did this scenario here. You can only spend money on travel spent for the grant program, right? processing, marketing, sales, so on and so forth. You can't spend money going back and forth between the farm. So days I go to the farm to just do farming, like planting or harvesting or whatever, I note that here, and I created sort of a few formulas that separate those things. So I've got a separate tally for the amount of miles I've driven for processing and sales and marketing. And I add that up, and that's how much mileage I request. And it automatically populates this field over here every time, and automatically populates that every time as well. Did this thing here where every day I drive somewhere, I'm spending some time working. So oftentimes we donate in kind our labor. So whenever I go do something, I'm obviously working. And so this automatically populates the date, what I was doing, the category that it falls under, and then I can go in and say how many hours I spent working at that on that particular day. Then, based on whether or not it's worthy of the grant reimbursement or not, it'll tally up here. So I know that I actually could that month have dedicated $957.35 in labor based on the rates that you all propose, which is your farm manager rate that we wrote into our grants. So I also know what percentage of the, usually for you, it would be 50%. For me, it was 10% because I got in the COVID years, but 50%. So I would get my total of my expenses and everything, my total request, 50% of that. Well, I know that that number over here times my times 50% would be the total amount that I would dedicate in kind in labor. And so I sometimes left with extra labor that I could potentially use later on if I, fall and break a leg or whatever and don't work for 2 months. Well, I've accumulated that labor over the course of the grant. Maybe I can use that. So I just kind of bank that labor there. And then here's that bank of labor that I have in the past. So again, a little more complicated than it needs to be, but in the end, I just enter a few numbers every time I want to do a reimbursement, and it tells me a lot. And then I bring it over to this this letter and enter it all in there. And Jessica kind of shared what that letter looks like, how to make it streamlined, et cetera. But all those numbers come from that reimbursement request spreadsheet. Now that's something that we didn't share an example of, but I think it's super important to sort of create something like that for yourself to make this stuff easier as you go along. Let's see. Any other points I want to make there? Jim mentioned, this doesn't have to be a book. I do keep it very simple. I know the things I can request reimbursement for, and the way I describe things in here falls in line with the way things are described in my work plan. So I buy it. Is it for processing, sales, marketing, or distribution, right? So I just use that language consistently throughout. X for processing loofah, boom for processing loofah, boom for processing loofah. Keep it simple. And I'm kind of running short on time here, so I'm going to move on to the next thing real quick. In terms of my bank book, these numbers have all been changed, but the total grant was $150,000. And yes, you enter that information, the request that you make every time around, and I can see down here how much I have left. Man, I sure, and this is real life, I haven't spent enough money on the labor. It's been hard to find labor. Things are slower than we were hoping in a couple spaces. So, I'm going to keep an eye on that. These are not real, but maybe I've spent almost all my marketing supplies money, and I need to get a whole nother table set up somewhere. Well, I could probably pull some money when it comes time, and I know Jessica's going to talk about a budget change request. But this is a spot where I'd be looking to later on. And this tool is really valuable in terms of keeping track of how much you've spent and how much you've got left. And then the last form is that SF270. Again, I don't think I would share anything that Jessica didn't already share on this. I am in a different scenario, only having to match 10% because of the COVID grant. But yeah, I think the most confusing thing about this is federal versus non-federal. All your information should be however much you're requesting. Your non-federal share should be the exact same amount of that for everybody on this call. So yeah, I think that just about covers the way that I do it. I know Marvin's got his hand raised, and Jessica, if there's anything, we talked about this before, if there's anything you think I missed from what I do, then please let me know.
I think that was great. And again, I just want to comment on, you all saw the tool for him tracking his own time and using it for the in-kind match. As a reminder, total in-kind match from your labor, from your owner or family labor, can only be half of your total match. So just keep that in mind when you're tracking it that way, and you're doing your reimbursements and all of that. Just cumulatively over your total match, it can only be up to half of that match.
And the last thing before I get to Marvin's question is, we mentioned this, but doing this, I mean, you already have to do, you wrote the grant because you're already doing all of these things, or maybe you want to help yourself do some of what you're doing a little bit better in a little bit, broader sense. So working harder up front, to create these things will only help what you're doing in the long run. I use this, like I said before, I use this in terms of my accounting stuff, and for tax purposes down the line. It helps me track my mileage for tax purposes. It helps me track my labor for tax purposes. So this is a tool that I see as not just for the grant, just to get my money. It's great. It helps with that. It makes everything easier for V, and speaking from experience, the easier you make it for V, the quicker you get your money. And there's a reality to that, but it also really ends up helping me in the long run. And that's the point. We want to leverage this grant and the things you do for it to help make you more successful at your business. Yes, Marvin, what's your question?
Near the beginning, when you started talking, you were talking about raw products that you were getting from other farmers. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, you're able to get no more than, it has to be less than 50% of raw products that you will add value to from a farm elsewhere, but that has to be written into your grant from the very beginning. You can't just go ahead and start doing that. That has to be part of your budget from the beginning. So for instance, if I know a farmer who's growing loofah and I decide, oh, hey, I'd like to buy those from you instead of you selling them, that's something that I can do, but I can't, because you have to be a grower, a producer for this grant. I can't buy all my product and then sell it as though it's mine. I can do a certain small percentage of that.
Thank you.
I answer that well enough there, V and Matt's and crew?
Yep,
Okay.
that's perfect.
All right, I'm gonna have to sign off right now, and I know that my information is in the last slide here for contact. Quite a few of you have it, I believe, but I'm available through SBDC to help folks with this, and I'd be glad to help walk you through creating something like this for yourself if you really want to go ahead and do it. So yeah, good luck to everybody. Thank you.
So we do just have a couple more slides that I want to get through, and then we will be.
Did Marvin have another question?
Oh, yep, I see your hand there, Marvin.
Will this be available for us to review? Let's say you're recording it.
Yes, yeah, we'll send out the
Okay.
recording along with the samples of the forms that I showed there in those fillable forms and everything, so you can see them close up filled out if you prefer that, and so you can review them that way.
Yeah, we know it's a lot coming at you. So the idea is that you can kind of hear this the first time and then refer back when you go back to fill out your reimbursement.
Yeah, I've shared this. We did this in the past, and I've shared that link multiple times with folks. So definitely feel free to go back to that.
Thank you.
Okay, so in addition to your reimbursement request, you are also responsible for biannual reports. So that's 2 each year of your total grant period. So you've got 3 years, you're doing 2 for each of those 3 years. Your first report is going to cover the time period between October and March, and so it will be due in April. And then your next one will be due in October to cover the other months. So there are 2 pieces to this. There is the performance progress report. That again is another narrative piece, but it is a specific template and form I'll show you that is provided by V. And you'll fill that out. That's really just where you discuss your progress so far with the grant, any setbacks that you've had, changes to your business, or changes from the grant, and you'll also report on your outcomes. Then there's the federal financial report, and this is where you just report how much of the federal money you've spent and how much of your match you've spent so far during that time period. As a reminder, instructions for this are included in your grant agreement that you were provided. So just a quick note about your report. So specifically for the progress report, when you're talking about your accomplishments in terms of your objectives from the grant, make sure that you're comparing them to what you're comparing what actually happened to what you actually reported in your application, by your specific tasks and breakdowns. So I think, like in Brian's example, one of his tasks was to, conduct marketing to increase sales and get a higher customer base, so just compare that back to what you've actually done and report on those objectives. For working capital grants, you are required to talk about if you've expanded your customer base, if you've increased your revenue, and the jobs that you've created or saved with the use of the grant funds.
And I was going to comment that you still have to do a report, even if you don't spend money during that period.
Yeah.
So you still have to report on what you did. So say you had a project that was only going to spend for, product and employees in the summertime, you still have to turn that report in April. So don't forget to do that.
I'll show you what the report templates look like. We don't have a completed one because it all is very specific to your operations and kind of what you're doing. But if you have any questions about it while you're doing it, let me know. Oh, I may have actually closed it out. A few seconds, let me pull it back up for you.
But as you're writing these are just a couple of what you're doing. You don't have to, we're not writing War and Peace here for the report. So it's, a summary of the activities of where you're heading and what you have for those activities.
So this one is the federal financial report that you have to fill out. Again, it's the basic information, the federal agency, USDA rural development, your information, your DUNS and your EIN. The reporting period, so that'll be that October to March period for your first one. And then this is just, again, cumulatively how much you have received from the federal share, as well as how much that you have shared. And there is a spot for program income, but we're not reporting program income on this. Is that right, V? That's right, we're not. Oh.
She's nodding, yes. And these also should match up with what you have in your bank book to help.
Yeah, this is the great item to help with your bank, or the great spot where your bank book will really help, because you'll just have those totals on hand that you'll be able to fill it in there. So that's what this piece.
And that would be your summary number across multiple reimbursements too.
Right. Let me show you really quick what the progress report looks like. And this is that narrative piece. Again, you fill out the top with your information, and then you just write your narrative in here. And again, this doesn't have to be a very long narrative. You can even attach a separate form if you want, a separate Word document, if that's just easier for you to fill that out in there. This is really just where you're going to tell them what's going on. So like Brian showed us, he was having trouble spending down his personnel money. So just state, having trouble finding good personnel that I need, or decided that I didn't need as much labor as I thought. Conversely, if you're hiring a lot more people, you want to discuss that, talk about the growth of your business. Again, you're going to discuss there the increase in your customer base, talk about some specific examples, like we added Whole Foods to our wholesale clients or something like that. If you've hired new people, talk about that. If you've maintained staff, so you thought if we weren't able to increase our sales with these grant funds, we would have had to let people go, but now we've saved their positions, talk about that. And then your increase in sales, just how much your sales have changed during that time period.
And I think it's always good to compare this to what you put in your grant for your, where you thought you were going to be. It's always good to say, hey, we thought we were going to be at, a 50% increase and we're at a 70% increase of business.
Yeah.
But
Or if you say, well, we had a hurricane come through and it flooded our farm. Those are also the type of things that you want to include in there just to let them know what's going on. Because I know that can be a real thing for some of us. Okay. Any quick questions about that? I'm just going to talk real quick about the budget modifications, and then we'll be wrapped up. So budget modifications, you're only allowed to do it once, so make sure you make it count. We normally suggest to wait until the end to do it again, so that you know that it's actually going to be worth it and that you're actually moving money to where you're going to need it at the end. The budget modification can only be up to 10% of your total budget. So if you requested 250,000 in grant funds, you're matching with 250,000 grant funds. That's total budget of 500,000. So your 10% of that would be 50,000 that you can move around in your budget. You do have to keep your modifications within the parameters of your current work plan. So if for whatever reason you didn't include personnel in your work plan originally, you can't suddenly add that as a category. It can only move between the existing categories there. And then you also have to provide the rationale for it. So it could be, couldn't hire the labor we needed or whatever it is. And again, but we recommend waiting till the end when you really need to spend those grant funds to move it around, and just use your bank book. That'll let you know what you've got going on and if you think you might need to move it. All right, and here's our contact information. So if you have follow-up questions, need help with anything like that, let us know. You can contact us directly. Those are phone numbers and emails, and also information from Brian there. If you, he offered to help you guys set up some tools or talk about how to set up some of the Excel sheets like he made. So you can reach out to him directly about that.
And I would say, again, reiterate, get started soon on these, get a small one in before you get behind and, desperately need the money for your account. Work with V on it. She has her hand tied a lot of times by regulations and other stuff. She's not deliberately trying to be mean to you when she's turning something down. It just, she has to watch the stuff of the federal regulations, and that's her job on that level to make sure of that. So, make sure if that helped to work. And the other thing is that, check on things, there's going to be times too that V's going to be on vacation and, she gets sick like the rest of us and all that. So, pay attention to timing on some of that too, to check, on the thing. But I think typically you're kind of see the flow of how long it takes to get your stuff done, to get the forms done. And, try to follow along with the time frame that you had in your budget and not hold on forever for invoices to it. Makes it a lot easier to process it kind of as you're going along for the project. And that helps you to show also progress on the grant as well.
And one other note about time frame is if you spend it faster than you originally thought, that's okay. But you still only have 3 years to spend it. So you won't have longer than that, but you can do it sooner than 3 years. All right, any questions?
And V commented that she tries to get it out within a week. But any questions, comments from folks?
All righty, well, thanks everyone for joining us.
Cool.
Like you said,
Congratulations on winning the grant, and we look forward to it. And, as V said, once the account is set up, it's only about 3 days once it's processed for it to show up into your account after the week that she spends doing it.
Hey, Jim, I'm sorry. It's Tim Rowe. I did have a comment. I just wanted to thank you guys for doing this. For me, this is my first year doing this. So this is very helpful. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Well, holler, and like we said, we're gonna send you a link to the video because we know when you go through it, by tomorrow it'll get muddy about what we said. So do it, and you have our contact number to reach out to us when it's happening as well.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks to everybody too. This is Gwen. It's been very informative.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, y'all, and we look forward to working with you again soon.